It's time for the chip race.
For strategy this week, I'm delighted to welcome back to the show a former Pocket Fives #1 online player, currently #2 in those rankings, founder of the staking group BitB with over 14 million in combined online and live earnings. He is Patrick Leonard. Pads, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be here again.
It's great to have you back, Pads. To this hand, it's from the 2016 WCOOP. You are 8-handed in what is a $700 event. The blinds are 16K, 32K. You have 2 million chips. That's just over 62 big blinds. And you make it 76K under the gun with the Ace of Spades, King of Hearts. Under gun +2 is Nick Petrangelo, and he makes it 214K off his 2.7 million stack with the King Queen of Diamonds. Action folds all the way back to you, and you elect to 4-bet to 581K. Nick calls. Pads, instinctively, I normally call the 3-bet in this spot, particularly versus one of only 2 other stacks at the table that have me covered. What are the benefits of re-raising over flatting here?
First of all, I think ace-king versus 3-bets is probably like one of the most misplayed spots in tournament poker in general. I see a lot of people 4-bet shoving ace-king offsuit versus a 3-bet range, and also flatten versus a 3-bet range. But if you think about how Nick's range is constructed here, when I open and he continues, he's probably continuing his whole range as 3-bet. So like he's not as incentivized to play, let's say, pocket 2s here. He's more incentivized to play high cards like king-jack suited, queen-10 suited, ace-queen offsuit, maybe bluffing ace-jack offsuit, ace-10 offsuit, these kind of hands. You know, you'll have some hands like ace-5 suited, stuff like this. So when he 3-bets, I feel like he doesn't want to flat call because let's say if he flat calls, the button gets to call a hand like pocket 8s. The big blind gets to call a hand like 10-9 suited, right? So if let's say Nick has ace queen, by 3-betting, he knocks out equity from the button. He knocks out the small blind call in, let's say, jack 9 suited. He knocks out the big blind call in 5-6 offsuit. When he does 3-bet ace queen, I'm going to continue with hands which he dominates, like king queen and ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, stuff like this. So I think, first of all, understanding how he should play his range is the most important thing. So then I can then make my counter strategy. When he does 3-bet, like I said, I think he's going to have a lot of hands like ace queen, ace jack, ace 5 suited, king queen suited, king jack suited, all these kind of hands. I see a lot of people just shoving like 50 big blinds or whatever, but to me that never really makes too much sense. I dominate his range so much. He's never 3-betting a hand like pocket 6s and then going to 5-bet shove. So I don't really fold out a lot of equity by shoving myself. I think by 4-betting, a few things can happen. First of all, he can level himself or just assume that part of his strategy should be to 5-bet shove a hand like ace-5 suited, which I do really well against. He's going to have lots of hands in position, which he may feel like positional advantage will be good enough for him to continue, like ace-queen, king-queen. But all of these hands are going to be hands which I do extremely well against. So with ace-king, I think it's very important to like try to make the SPR as close to 1 as possible. And then whenever we both flop top pair or we both have like a gut shot and 2 overs or whatever, then it's very likely that all the money's going to go in as myself as a big favorite. And it's unlikely the money's going to go in as a big underdog.
That's interesting. Dara, looking at Petrangelo's play, are you a fan of his 3-bet? And maybe more importantly, what do you make of his rather speculative flat?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make sense, as Pads alluded to there, for him to basically 3-bet his entire range, given the positions and the number of players to act behind. So the 3-bet seems fine. Calling the 4-bet does seem very wide. I'd actually be interested to hear what Pads thinks of it as well. It seems like a pretty easily dominated hand, not really in great shape against Pads' range overall. I just wonder, like, if he's not folding this hand, what is he folding?
I have ace king this time, obviously, but because he's 3-betting only with his range, I'm also incentivized to 4-bet bluff quite a lot too. So if I have a hand like ace 9 suited or let's say queen 9 suited, 4-betting queen 9 to like fold out, let's say ace 10 off, ace jack off, king 9 suited or whatever it may be is quite attractive for me. And another important thing is that I'm not 4-betting wide for value. So like I have ace king here. He may not even expect that, but I'm not going to 4-bet, let's say, pocket 10s or like pocket jacks here to get it in. So my value range is extremely tight. It's like aces, kings, probably queens and ace king, but I can have a bunch of bluffs as well. Yeah. So it's not like my range is like super, super nutted. So I think king, queen suited peel-in can be okay. It's very easy for me to be over bluffing, you know, like if I choose like ace, jack offsuit and 4-bet bluff, that's already offsuit combinations, which are significantly more than pocket pairs kind of thing.
And for a little bit of context, what stage of the tournament are we at now? Is there any significant ICM at play here? Obviously, you're two of the bigger stacks at your table, but I'm actually not sure how many others were there.
I mean, the tournament is called Ultra Deep. I know it's in the money. I think it's like last 4 tables or something, like kind of crunch time.
Okay. Well, to the flop, the pot is roughly 1.24 million. The SPR, as you mentioned, it being important to get that down from your perspective, is 1.15 to 1. And it comes to 3 of diamonds, 2 of clubs, 2 of spades. It seems like the best hand pre will certainly still be good here. You go for a very small sizing, betting 222k, about 18% of pot. Nick calls. Dara, we talk a lot about range advantage. My guess is Patrick, as the 4-better, has the advantage here, but Nick's range to call a 4-bet should be pretty damn strong too, and could even include some super strong hands that he's elected to flat for deception. What does the solver say?
Yeah, well, I'll give the usual caveats about obviously it depends on the ranges. I put in the best ranges that seem most sensible to me. I give both players, well, Pads in particular, very tight value range and then some bluffs, and Petrangelo's range is more condensed. If the ranges are set up that way, then yeah, you basically nailed it. The 4-better here has a range advantage. PO puts it at about 55-45. Nevertheless, PO doesn't just go ahead and auto bet here. It actually checks more often than it bets with range. Checks about 2/3 of the time and bets 1/3 of the time. And every hand in that range is a mix. So with Pad's specific holding, ace, king, and those suits, bets 25%, checks 75%. So I think it does come down to the fact that like whoever was ahead pre-flop is still ahead.
Well, Pads, you went for this small C bet. Did you give any consideration to checking, and was there already some specific tendencies maybe in Nick's game you were looking to exploit?
I'm pretty sure in these spots we would range bet, and often in spots, if you don't give like the solver a very small size, and let's say 10% pod or 15% pod, it will often start checking a bunch of its range when SPR is quite low. I think betting here generally is going to be better than shoving because we don't have many hands which want to shove from our value region. Like we don't have, say, pocket nines here, which wants a lot of protection. Hands like aces, hands like kings, hands like queens, they don't need too much protection. I'm happy for him to continue with hands like queen 10 suited, queen jack suited, king jack suited, because I do very well on turns against these hands. And also my bluffs are often going to be like ace jack or like even ace queen, stuff like this. So if he does continue with, say, king queen and queen jack suited and stuff like this, then my bluffs will even like cooler his floats on the turn, if that makes sense as well. So I think basically every hand in my range really wants to go small and no hand really wants to shove. Like I don't want to shove ace queen to fold out queen jack, you know, it doesn't really make too much sense.
Very good. Well, with King Queen of Diamonds, Nick's call obviously seems pretty standard given he has the backdoor flush draw, and your sizing does force him to continue with so much of his range. So to the turn, the pot is 1.69 million. The SPR is now down to 0.7 to 1, and it comes the Jack of Diamonds. So the board now reads 3 of diamonds, 2 of clubs, 2 of spades, Jack of Diamonds. You check, and Nick checks back his King high flush draw. Pads, are you checking with the intention of calling a bet or shove here?
I think often here, I'm not really thinking about it too much because he's usually going to just check. I'd say he has aces. He's going to check because if I have a hand like king queen, he wants me to improve or bluff the river. Basically, if he has a value hand, let's say pocket jacks or aces or even ace jack, the SPR is so low that he gets more EV from slow playing, but also for protecting the other hands in his range. Like let's say his ace tens and ace queens that may want to not get bluffed on the river or whatever. Like by checking his value part of his range when the SPR is like 0.7 or whatever it is quite good. So I think when I'm checking here, I'm just expecting him to always check. So I'm not really like thinking, okay, am I going to check call all in or check fold or whatever? I assume that he's going to just basically check everything. If he did shove, I would most likely call, thinking that he's shoving a hand like ace 4 of diamonds or ace 5 of diamonds or something like this, because I don't think ace jack would shove. I don't think kings would shove. If he does somehow have a hand like pocket tens and shove, I still have okay equity. I'm not like dead against that.
Well, Dara, I think a lot of players listening to this would think Nick has hit one of his best semi-bluffing cards and should ship it in here on the turn. Why would that be a mistake?
The SPR is so low now that it's kind of difficult to fold any value at all. Like as Pad said, even if Nick has tens here and shoves, Pad's is going to call with ace king because he has reasonable equity against that, and it's not always tens. So same comment kind of applies with king queen suited. If he shoves the king queen suited, he's getting snapped by ace king, and he's in particularly bad shape against that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, to the river, the pot is still 1.69 million and it comes to 6 of clubs. So the final board reads 3 of diamonds, 2 of clubs, 2 of spades, jack of diamonds, 6 of clubs. Pads, you bet 320k, what looks initially like a 20% blocker bet. Nick shoves for effectively 1.2 million, 880k more. And I guess it wasn't a blocker bet because you made the call. Patrick, as played, the true function of your bet was an inducer. How confident were you that Nick would go for it and that you could be good often enough?
I'm not really approaching it like trying to induce or trying to do anything like that. It's more on the river. I'm thinking about what his range looks like. Ace, queen, very often. King, queen suited. King 10 suited. Queen 10 suited. Maybe like ace 5 suited. Maybe ace 10 suited. He doesn't really have many hands which are like super strong. He has a lot of very weak hands. So if I think of like range versus range, if I shove in my spot, his range is very easy to play, right? Like if he has a jack, he calls. If he has, overpairs, he calls. With his pot odds, he doesn't have to call very wide. However, if I use a kind of 20% pot, he has to defend a lot of his range. He's forced to defend a lot of his range. Otherwise, he's exploited very easily. So he has to start considering continuing with hands like king, queen. He has to consider where is king, queen in his range? Where is ace 5 in his range? It's a lot more difficult for him to play versus 20% pot than it is versus shove. In terms of ace king, I think it's like a pretty clear value bet. I block aces, I block kings, I block ace jack suited and king jack suited, which he could potentially have turned a jack. If I bet the size, and like I said, he has to continue way wider than ace king. He's going to have to call all of his ace queens. He's most likely going to have to call like some ace tens, and then maybe he turns some stuff into bluffs. Maybe like ace 5 thinks it's a good hand to call with because I'm not going to bluff like ace queen myself, and he unblocks like king queens and 9-10 suiteds and stuff like this. Like ace 5 could be a good bluff catcher for him. So I think by using this sizing, I make it very difficult for him to play his range, and by shoving I make it very easy to play his range. And if he does shove, then I will then reevaluate and consider my blockers and consider where I am in my range, kind of thing.
That's a fascinating view into it. Dara, when you first saw this hand, you described this street in particular as a head scratcher. What exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess my initial reaction was like you, that this is a blocker bet, and then we get raised and we call anyway. Obviously, Nick Petrangelo is the villain, and he's somebody who's known to be very aggressive in these types of spots. If he's not balanced, it's far more likely that he's unbalanced towards over bluffing rather than under bluffing. In that situation, I would have thought it made more sense if we want to induce him to bluff or indeed over bluff to check, basically, because then his bluffing range would presumably be wider than when we bet ourselves. But I guess the function of the bet is also, as Pad said, we get some hands like ace queen, then have to call. So maybe we get more value from that range. I did put it into PO, and again, the usual caveats apply of the ranges have to be set up correctly and the sizings on all streets have to be set up correctly. On the flop, I just gave 2 possible sizings, the one that Pad's actually used, and all in. On turn, I gave a few sizings. On the river, I actually gave PO 4 different sizings, starting with the smallest being the one that Pad's used, and then going all the way up to all in. Interestingly, PO only ever used one sizing when it bet, and that was all in. With Pad's specific hand, PO shoved 70% and checked 30%.
That's interesting as well. Pads, do you have any response to that?
I ran the hand also, and like Dara said, it's all about how ranges are set up and how you assume the ranges look like. The way that I have the ranges constructed, at least, we mostly just use this small size. And like, let's say I have a hand like queen 9 suited or something. I'm not going to shove to fold out a hand like king queen suited or whatever. I can just use this smaller size. And if I'm only value betting aces and kings and then bluffing everything else, then he can just call everything because I'm over bluffing a lot. If I'm using offsuit combinations of ace king as a value bet, then I have a lot of combinations of thin value bets, and he has to be more careful with his bluff catching, getting such a good price still.
Well, to keep it on you for the final thoughts there, Pads, clashes of 2 top players with 2 big stacks deep in a big MTT often means a cooler. This one is far from a cooler. Neither of you made a pair down the streets. As I said at the top, I would have flagged the 3-bet and proceeded cautiously post-flop with a bigger SPR, but my instinct here is that as a regular at high stakes, you have to be out there maybe drawing clearer lines in the sand with other top players, even if that means adding volatility and variance in spots such as this one. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think actually these spots against weaker players almost work better. I mean, at least if you have an aggressive image and you 4-bet these spots, it's very easy for a weaker player or someone with maybe a weak mindset or whatever to be like, it's so hard for him to have a value hand here. He's only going to 4-bet aces and kings. He can bluff ace jack and king queen and blah, 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 blah. And I see people like 5-bet shoving like ace 5 suited and ace queens. And let's say someone has an ace queen in Nick's spot and they're like a weaker player than Nick. They often will not want to call a 4-bet with ace queen, but they think that I'm like fucking around or like trying to like exploit them or whatever, or they're so scared to be bluffed that they'll just like shove, let's say like, even if it's like 20% of the time, then 20% of the time I'm getting a huge double up to go chip leader pretty often. I think it's quite important to gather chips and to play aggressively. Like when I have 2 million and Nick has 2 million, I think we're the 2 chip leaders of the tournament most likely. Being able to play like a huge pot to get to 4 million and being able to be chip leader on say the final table bubble or the last 2 tables where the numbers are imbalanced, or even going to the final table, it'll have an impact. I think really pushing these spots is going to be pretty crucial for your overall ROI, because your overall ROI will come from, winning tournaments and coming top 3 in tournaments. And like you said, even though we both don't have a pair here, because the SPR has been decreased so much pre-flop, often you will get it in very light for kind of value, or like be able to bluff catch very wide, If I just called the free bet and he'd like went bet all in, it's a lot different than the way that I've constructed the pot size pre-flop.
Well, it was a fascinating hand. It was a head scratcher, as Dara said. Thank you so much for explaining the rationale behind your line and for bringing your phenomenal insights to what was a really interesting hand. Patrick, Leonard, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Patrick.